Hello, everyone. This is Pam Moore, Director of the New Mexico Judges and Lawyers Assistance Program. I'm also part of the New Mexico Wellbeing Committee, and I'm here to introduce Legal Wellbeing in Action, a podcast series offered by the New Mexico Wellbeing Committee. Last year was the first full year of the Wellbeing Committee at work. In identifying ways to bring well-being education and initiatives to the New Mexico legal community, we created a 2021 campaign called What a Healthy Lawyer Looks Like. 2021 is dedicated to educating the New Mexico legal community on a variety of well-being topics that pertain to work and home life. Our goal is that every judge, lawyer, law student, and legal staff person can find some aspect of their mental, emotional, physical, or spiritual health to improve upon. We strive to educate, encourage, and support the New Mexico legal community to show up as their best self in all aspects of life, which means we will be covering a wide variety of topics that relate to the whole human self. Thank you for being here today listening to Legal Wellbeing in Action.
Hello, everyone. Tanessa Akins here. I'm the Clinical Coordinator for the New Mexico Judges and Lawyers Assistance Program and also the podcast series coordinator. This month's episode will be featuring the topic of compassion fatigue and lawyer well-being. For our returning listeners, you may remember the compassion fatigue episode that aired in July of this year. This is part 2 of that episode where our speakers return to talk about the practical application of how to take those realistic steps to take care of yourself in this profession. Speaking of the speakers, returning with us in this episode is Mr. Bill Slease, Miss Rebecca Kitson, and Miss Sarah Armstrong. Thank you to each of you for volunteering your time again to this topic. I really do always enjoy talking to you three about lawyer well-being, and it is a true joy to have you all back. So, to introduce our speakers for any of the new listeners, Bill Slease is the Professional Practice Program Director for the State Bar of New Mexico. In addition to his duties at the State Bar, he serves as an adjunct professor at the University of New Mexico School of Law, where he teaches ethics, 1L Lab, and serves as the Practice Skills Evaluator for the Evidence Trial Practice Skills course. He formerly served as the Chief Disciplinary Counsel for the New Mexico Supreme Court Disciplinary Board. For our second speaker, Ms. Sarah Armstrong, partner at Armstrong, Roth, Whitley, Johnstone, LLC, she practices statewide in New Mexico exclusively in the areas of family law and domestic relations, including divorce, custody, visitation, adoption, child support, spousal support, and complex property division. Since then, she has completed more than 100 hours of training in alternative dispute resolution and has been formally trained in collaborative divorce since 2013. Sarah has been active in providing legal education to family law practitioners and is currently the chair-elect of the Family Law section of the State Bar of New Mexico. For our third and last speaker, Rebecca Kidson, the managing partner for Rebecca Kidson Law, LLC. In May of 2012, Rebecca established her own firm where she continues to practice the spectrum of immigration law, including employment and family-based immigration and removal defense. Rebecca has also been an adjunct professor of law at the University of New Mexico School of Law since 2009. And with that, I want to thank our listeners for tuning into Legal Wellbeing in Action, and as always, we hope you enjoy.
Thank you, Pam and Tanessa, for that introduction. And let me just take a minute of personal privilege and specifically say thank you to Pam Moore for and Tanessa Akins for just the thoughtfulness and the design of the podcast, the sort of constantly staying on us to move the content forward. And Tanessa in particular has just been tremendous in keeping things organized, getting these podcasts recorded, getting them out in a timely fashion, and really getting them promoted to the bar. And both the work that she's doing and the work that Pam does to really support well-being in this legal community is phenomenal and sometimes goes unrecognized. And it shouldn't, because what you guys are doing really matters and it counts. And so thank you both very much for all the work you do for this entire legal community. And thank you, Rebecca Kitson and Sarah Armstrong, for being with me again today. This is Bill Slease, here at the State Bar Professional Practice Program Director. We are fortunate to have Sarah and Rebecca join us again for what has sort of loosely been labeled as compassion fatigue 2.0, but we're really going to try and take it in a broader direction in terms of lawyer self-care, and how lawyers sort of build into their life some well-being practices. And I want to specifically say, Sarah reached out to me after the compassion fatigue podcast we did several months ago and said, it's all well and fine when lawyers, 3 or 4 lawyers sit and talk in a podcast about what compassion fatigue is, and it's important to take care of yourself. And, those are grand, high ideas, and we all ascribe to them. But when you're out there in the trenches, as Rebecca and Sarah are every day, with busy practices and busy lives, how does that really translate in the real world to real practicing lawyers? What does that look like? So at Sarah's suggestion, we talked and we thought, maybe it's time to talk about what it looks like in the real world, what the challenges are in the real world, and how lawyers can find balance and peace and engage in some self-care when they're right in the midst of a very chaotic and demanding profession. So let me just start by asking you, at least my observation, Sarah and Rebecca, is part of the issue, and I'm not sure it's changed culturally for lawyers much over the years. You guys are certainly going to be much closer to the fire than I am these days. But I know when I spent time in private practice for 20 plus years, there was definitely a culture-driven component to why lawyers have trouble with self-care. And then I think there's an ego-driven component. And the culture component, I think, is the notion that you have to work 80 hours to be a good lawyer, right? And you especially if you work with a larger firm, and I don't mean necessarily a larger firm or an organization, or even if you just have been around the legal community for more than a day, there's that notion that that's what lawyers do. They work 80 hours a week, and that they sacrifice all else. And, the rules of professional conduct, to some extent, they demand loyalty and competence and diligence and all of these things of lawyers that sort of drive you to put that as a priority in your life. And then there's the ego side of it, right? There's the, I'm responsible for all these clients. I'm responsible for these employees. I'm responsible for the world, right? If I don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. Only I can do it the right way. Talk a little bit about that for the folks who are listening today. How do you deal with that? How do you cope with that? Am I wrong? Is that not the culture, or is that eroding now with a younger generation of lawyers, the lawyers who really have more of an attention to well-being?
I think that's still the culture to a large extent. And Rebecca, I don't know if you find that. And I would say there is a difference, I think, between my practice and Rebecca's, and that, my practice in this, and I think I said this in the last podcast, is I came to family law after I'd done other stuff, but I came to it because it's very real, right? And so it's very much like you can really help people in the moment, and that feels really good. The problem is when it's not going well, it feels really bad. Right. But Rebecca's work is even more immediate, I think, and that the good and the bad feelings are, I would think, harder to deal with. All of that said, I think there's an element of, who works the most? I worked all weekend. I was up at 5 a.m. I was up at 4 a.m. I was, I think that is still a thing. And I think that I will say it took me years to realize that, and I wasn't always, I wasn't doing it for sort of credit in the community. I felt like I had to work that much, right? I felt like for a variety of reasons, and we don't need to get into like all of my personal life, but I felt like I had to work that much to be a good lawyer. And I think that came from law school. I think it came from trying to feel like you're a good lawyer when you're a young lawyer. And it took me, I would say, a good 15 years of practicing law before I felt like, wait a second, that's not necessarily at all how you are a good lawyer, but it was very real to me. And I don't know, Rebecca, how you feel about it.
Yeah, I think that the expectations are still out there, and I think that part of the issue is that we have expectations for ourselves, and the places that we work have expectations for us as well. And a lot of times they're not very clear. Even when if you're a new lawyer, the expectations that you're placing on yourself, or what the expectations are for the firm, sometimes it's not super clear both ways. I was talking to one of my law students. We were walking out of the building, and she was saying to me something she had done last weekend, and then she said, well, it's a good thing I'm doing it now because my weekends are going to be gone once I graduate. And I said, hold up, that's not necessarily the case. I'm like, don't resign yourself to that right now. And we actually had a conversation about it. And I think that it's important, if you're new into, the workforce as an attorney, to really to ask those questions when you're going into different types of practice, being able to speak to prospective employers, or even while you're in law school, being able to explore those types of things and finding out, like, is it billable hours? How is it that you progress within the firm? How does that fit with your lifestyle and your own self-expectations? And then from those of us who are now hiring other people, to really be able to consciously address what we expect of others too. Not only what we have written down, but like, is it okay that they have flexible hours? Is it okay that they do remote work? How many hours do you actually expect? Is there a dollar sign that people need to be able to bring in? Because, it's, as Brené Brown says, it's clarity is kindness, right? And being able to be really clear about those expectations. I don't think that we can put it entirely on the new bar to come in and say, this, to change the expectations, because that's incredibly difficult. But I think we all need to do some self-examination in that regard to consciously move the culture in a different direction.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair statement, right? You can't put it on the new generation of lawyers coming up, because there's such a power disparity when you're trying to get a job. And that's true whether you're trying to get a job with a firm or a government agency, or you're just going to set up your own practice. There's still that sort of internalized notion that this is what good lawyers do. It's kind of what Sarah talked about for those 15 years. It's not even so much, this is not an indictment of law firms, big firms, small firms, solos, anybody, right? It's a legal culture. I mean, I remember pretty early on, I tried to avoid watching lawyer shows, right? Because they made me crazy. But if you watch lawyer shows, right, the really good, successful lawyers on lawyer shows are the guys who are working all those long hours. They've got a cot in the office, so they never go home. Their family sort of as an afterthought, right? They're sort of bit players in the movie. And so it's that internalized notion. And when you couple that with a newer lawyer coming out who thinks, well, that's how it's got to be, I think you're right, Rebecca. If you don't change the culture really more from the top and start making it okay for lawyers to want that balance in their life, to make that a priority, like taking care of the clients, then I think that becomes a problem. And then the other aspect, and Sarah, I don't want to lose what you want to say, but I want you guys to both maybe talk about this a little bit, because I think, I also don't want to sound like we're indicting the legal profession, because there are many employers in the legal profession who really are committed to making that cultural change. But what about the client's expectations? Because clients also, I think, have this notion that, well, my lawyer is going to be a good lawyer if they're just working 24/7 on my behalf. And yeah, maybe they have other clients, but I expect them at my beck and call. So when I want to talk to them this weekend, and especially with the advent of email and other social media sites, right? When I need Rebecca or Sarah, by God, it's Sunday night, and who cares that they're with their kids? I want to be responded to. So how do you deal with that piece too?
Well, I do think, and I think this is what Rebecca was talking about, and I agree with it. It's like, well, first of all, we have to, as older lawyers, really focus on it. And that means also to our associates or whoever's working with us being like, no, we're not, no. Even though in my gut sometimes I really want my paralegal to do something on Sunday. That's not okay. It's unreasonable. You can't do it, right? And I think we all have to sort of curb our own expectations, and sort of extend that to other people, to other lawyers, to everybody else.
So some intentionality with building some structure, almost to impose upon yourself. even though my gut's telling me this doesn't feel right, I'm saying no to myself today because I'm not going to impose that internalized view of what I should be doing on everybody around me.
My gut is my old gut, right? My gut is my when I graduated from law school gut.
Right.
And that's not healthy gut. But and so you have, it's hard, and you have to think about it. And I think that also sorry, Bill, I think I'm going a little bit
No, go for
before
it.
I fill from your question. But I also just think we have to sort of start thinking about, okay, so what do things look like, and what does our life look like, and what do we want it to look like? And you know, and you have to set those expectations with clients, right? And you have to say from the beginning, like, I can't do this. And that's really, really hard for lawyers to say. I think it's very hard for us to say, I can't do that.
Right.
And it's,
yeah, you have to.
Yeah, no,
train
you
the
go,
client's
Rebecca.
Yeah, you have to train the client's expectations from the outset. And that's hard too, because, again, it's like setting these boundaries, it goes against, wanting, especially if you want business, you want the practice, different types of practices are going to have different requirements too. I mean, I'm a huge believer in calendaring everything and honoring your calendar. I'm working with a business coach right now who's very much into it. And, I think that a lot of times that overload and the stress, or even with clients, is that expectation, like, I need to be able to get a hold of you at some time. But the more that you calendar everything that you need, including personal things, we need to get personal things done this week. Mm-hmm. My coach is a huge believer of at least an hour every Monday morning to write down everything that you need, to take the time to really structure yourself, and to take time to plan. It feels restrictive in some ways, but it actually sets you free to be able to take, beginning of the week or whatever time works for you, really get everything down. Don't have shadow duties or things that you think are going to fit in between anywhere. Be super brutally honest with yourself about what you need to do. Even if you need to calendar those things outside of your normal work hours, be clear about how much you have to do. Because I do think that, Bill, we know that we want to be able to have balance and we want to be able to work less. And it's easy to say that in this type of a context, but we do also have the ethical requirements to be competent, to serve the clients, to communicate properly. So if you're honest with yourself about what you need to do, then you can get it on the calendar and you can see what you're dealing with. If it's spilling out much over that 40 hours, 50 hours a week, then there needs to be bigger structural changes that are done. But hiding it from yourself or telling yourself that you're going to fit in things that where there's no space for it can really lead to a lot of pain.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point that you've both made, that sort of structure that you build in. And part of that structure includes, what do I want to see in my personal life? Sarah mentioned it, like, what do I want to be, not just as a lawyer, but as a person, right? Which means, what does my practice look like? What does my personal life look like? And I know that was the same thing that you did, Rebecca, is I would sit down usually on a Monday morning and sort of gauge what the week's generally going to look like. I knew there was going to be a little bit of time in there when something unexpected happened. I'd calendar time for the unexpected, right? And then I would calendar the personal stuff. And so, when my son was younger and was playing soccer, I would calendar his soccer games as a commitment that was on par in my mind with showing up for a hearing, right? So those were on my calendar. So I would show up for those and spend that time enriching the life, right? And I'd look down the calendar long run and schedule a vacation time. Now, we were a two-person shop, so am I going to schedule a month off? Not, and still have my law partner, right? But I could schedule chunks where she knew I was going to be out, and we talked about how that was going to get covered. So there was real intent to it, because what I found is, if I stopped and just let the personal side drift, I was always great about calendaring all the business side, but if I let the personal side drift, it's what you said, Rebecca. I love that term, that sort of shadow, where I thought, oh, I'll make time for it. No big deal, right? Except the work would just eat it up if I didn't intentionally structure it so that the personal was just as structured, just as important as a priority. And then I love the other thing you talked about, Sarah, in terms of your old gut and sort of your your new intentionality, right? Which is the old gut wanting to tell you, and Rebecca, you're right too. I've got to do this for the clients. Yeah, you still have to meet your obligations of competence, diligence, all of the communication. But the intentional practice is, okay, I'm also going to build in time for these things that are important. And if I've got too much of that client work, I've got to think about whether or not there's something to cut back, which is scary. I mean, I remember being in a 2-person shop and think, man, I don't want to start turning work down, because what happens if they don't keep coming in the door? So that balance is tough. It's what I call, Sarah, my new gut, which was gut wrenching, right? Because I'm thinking, what if they don't keep coming back? I have to try to find this balance in a way that works for everybody, and that's not always easy.
Well, it never makes fun of me. I love that shadow. That's such a good and Rebecca, it's that 3 a.m. thing where you're like, oh my gosh, it's there, right? And you're trying to be good, but also like, and everyone makes fun of my mom. Oh my gosh, we're all gonna get disbarred. We're all gonna starve in the streets. It's all happening, guys. But that feels real,
Yep.
you know, and that's hard, and it's really, really hard to undo. And I think sometimes it takes something very real happening in your life to really sort of jolt you into thinking differently. And it shouldn't take that, right? It shouldn't take a parent being sick. It shouldn't take you being sick. It shouldn't take such a huge something that's really like knocking you off your feet to sort of show you that this isn't the way. Your whole life can't be this job.
Right.
It's important, and we only do it because it is important, but you shouldn't have to have something really bad happen to you to make you realize that you need to change your priorities, right? Or to find a coach. And I mean, part of the problem too is that, you know, you can't always find a coach, right? I mean, or you don't have the money for it. I mean, like if you're a solo practitioner and you're a young practitioner, you're not going to be able to go pay somebody who has all this good advice, right?
Right.
To teach you these things. You're going to have to learn it on your own, and it's hard. And right. I wish for all, I hope, whatever we want to call that for all of us, that I wish I'd learned that a long time ago, more about valuing your actual life. And I do think that segues into your professional responsibility. And it doesn't say that in the code, right? And so when we're sitting through our our CLEs and they're saying, don't do this, don't do that, you know, you're not thinking about, you're just sitting there like a deer in the headlights, like, oh my gosh, don't mess up, don't get disbarred. But it all said, it fits into that, you know, and I wish that I'd learned that a long time ago. I think it would have made my practice at least a lot less stressful for me.
Yeah. So what I've heard from both of you is you've got to be intentional about it, right? You've got to be intentional about building in a sort of priorities that include your personal self-care, your personal life, things that are important to you. Just from the outside looking in, you're both busy lawyers. You both have life commitments outside of work that include family, right? You both probably have things that you enjoy doing in addition to practicing law that are very personal to each of you. What does it look like in the real world for each of you besides, okay, you calendar, which is one thing. Maybe you reach out to a business coach if you can. Maybe you try to find a mentor if you can to help you do that intentionality. What else? What other tricks have you learned along the way? What other things can you pass on, especially to newer lawyers, about how they intentionally focus on more than just the day-to-day practice to the point that they're drowning in 80 and 90-hour weeks?
I think, you know, and I know that you had another podcast that touched on this. You have to build into to your daily ritual and routine. I'm a big believer in routines. I'm also a big believer in mornings being a really productive time. People have different sleep patterns and that sort of thing, but you know, being able to have a ritual before you go to sleep, and sleep is such a huge thing, because if you are unfocused and you're not able to give 100% to the task that you're doing at the time, and that goes to the intentionality too, not intentionality sort of writ large, but also for whatever task that you're doing at that point, to really be able to focus, you have to be well rested enough. It has to be a priority. And, of course, all of the other, physical self-care should be part of that schedule as well. It's common too to say that being able to realize that, of course, multitasking is a myth, and that being able to really be focused on one task at a time and being able to turn off distractions, and calendaring, email. If you are the most productive that you can be, you can get a lot more done in less time. And then that opens up additional, time to be able to do some of these other activities. It's so much bigger than, yoga and a spa day. All of those are wonderful too, but self-care is so much more about every single day.
The Solutions Group, the State Bar of New Mexico's EAP provider, offers confidential and free professional counselors to support employees and their direct family members by offering short-term counseling, assessment, and referrals for any life struggle. This includes drug addiction, relationship conflict, anxiety, depression, and grief and loss. Other services include dependent care, crisis assessment, intervention, and educational presentations, free well-being webinars, and an online stress assessment tool. Call 505-254-3555 or 1-866-254-3555 and identify with NMJ Lab to schedule an appointment or video visit.
Right, structure and routine. I mean, I think that's huge, and it's interesting. I mean, I'm not stealing the thunder of the other podcasts on sleep. I'm sure you guys have heard this same thing. I think I read or heard that if you get less than something like 6 hours of solid quality sleep, and it's usually most people need more than that, but you're the equivalent of intoxicated, impaired the next morning. And how's that good lawyering, right? When you're impaired to the point that you're so exhausted you can't get anything done. What do you think, Sarah? Structure, routine, have you got any particular tricks that you like to use to make sure that you're ignoring that law school gut and you're paying attention to that more enlightened gut?
I mean, I think I agree with Rebecca. Setting, and I think this helps with clients too, saying this is our time, right? This is when we respond to, absent emergencies, right? This should be your expectation, and that should be your expectation for yourself. And I definitely believe that, like, when you have to sleep, and I mean, I thought for years I didn't, but I was younger and I was a lot of things. But you're not as good, and I think that the benefit to being a person, a lawyer, whoever we are and however we identify in this day and age, is that there's a lot of research that shows and says you have to sleep. Not sleeping's not okay. You cannot be your job cannot be your identity. There's a whole body of research that helps with that. And so I think that is helpful. And I think that helps with the gut sometimes too. But yes, I think having set expectations and a schedule helps you as an attorney and helps clients.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something really critical there, Sarah, which I don't want to lose that thread, right? There's nothing wrong with being, and Rebecca talked about it earlier as well, nothing wrong with being really clear with your clients about what they can expect from you as a lawyer. And you may not be the right fit for them. They may have this misguided notion of what a lawyer is going to be like and do, and that if you can't give me 24/7 attention, then you're not my lawyer. Okay, there's nothing wrong with telling that client there might be a better fit for you. I think, Sarah, you hit on it, which is make those expectations known to your client. Absent an emergency, here's when you can expect us to respond. And understand, client, and you say this in a gentle way, right? Your definition of emergency and mine might be different. right? And so when you don't hear from me right away, it's not that you're not important. It's not that I'm not doing the work for you. I've got this structure, and here's when you're going to hear from me. Or, sometimes I know when I was in private practice, it took me a while to get there, but we got good at delegating some of the non-emergency communications. So the client knew we heard you. We're going to get back to you. He's out of the office today for whatever reason. And sometimes if the client and I had the relationship, I might tell him it was for a personal reason. If not, I just would tell him he's out today. Tell him I'll get back to him tomorrow. So I think that's important, is not to lose sight of. We're not saying abandon your clients, don't communicate, don't do your job under the rules of professional conduct. We're saying set those expectations with them as well.
Well, and I think Rebecca kind of touched on this, is that some people do, some people do work at night. I'm not a person that can work late at night, but there are other lawyers who don't mind working late at night, or who don't mind a less sort of structured schedule than I need, right? And so maybe that's the person they can hire, right? And there's people I know who are like, oh, I don't care. I'll text clients. I'll do X, Y, and Z, things that like feel very invasive to me and are hard for me to handle, but they can. And so maybe that's a fit for a different client. Do you know what I mean? Someone who's going to be able to get immediate results, or will be able to, correspond at 11 o'clock at night. I mean, and that's okay for those attorneys. It's just, I don't think you should feel like you have to do that. And Rebecca, I don't know if that's exactly what you were saying earlier, but
yeah, I mean, I think that the important thread that's coming out of this is that, you are in control of being able to craft what your life looks like and what you're willing to accept. You have the power to be able to do that. If that means that you're, if you're a boss, or if you're a new employee or whatever, you do have the choice to find the right fit for you. As well as with your clients, that like clients, the best way that we can represent people is when there's a good fit. And that being clear about who you are, how you practice, and what your priorities are will allow you to find the best fit as far as an employment situation. And will also, if you're working with direct service to clients, being able to find the correct fit for that. With these types of jobs that we do, Sarah, that have that have a huge impact on your heart, I think it's even more important, because it's your ability to connect with the person in the best way and really be able to be super effective with that client. Is that proper fit? It doesn't make sense that we build, that we're careful about our relationships in every other context, but we wouldn't be careful about the relationships with our clients. These are important relationships. It's part of effective representation. And so it's good to be clear and to take the time to really think and lay out, who is your ideal client? Who do you want to serve? And who are you best to serve?
And what can you give them, right? I mean, saying like, if you are someone who wants, immediate responses, or if you want X, Y, and Z, like I can't give that to you. And here's a list of people who are great, who can. And I think that's, it's hard. And that's what Bill was talking about. It's hard when you're also, because you're trying to manage all of this and also business, right? And we're all trying to, feed our families.
Right.
And it's difficult. And that kind of segues to a question that I got after one of the last podcasts, which was, what do you do when you have a client who you're in it and you're all, oh my gosh, this is not working.
Right. So you mean like sort of an overinvestment in a difficult client or an emotionally difficult case?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, how do you get out? How do you get out? What do you do? What's your obligation?
Yeah. And that's a great question. I think we've all been there. I think two important points, right? One that you both just made, it's not a one size fits all model, right? So we're not here preaching that, by God, you have to do it the way we think you should do it. Some people work well in a really alternative structure as long as it's thoughtful and it's resonating with them, right? And it resonates with their clients. So there's a good fit, as Rebecca and Sarah, you both said. But what happens when, against your sort of your radar gut, right? Which is the one that said, I shouldn't take this case, or I shouldn't take this client, or I'm not sure I'm emotionally prepared to do this, or whatever the issue is. And all of a sudden you find yourself in the middle of it. And man, it's that energy vampire. It's just pulling out of you emotionally. It's pulling out your time. It's really an investment in the case now that, oh my God, what do I do? How do I back out of this? I can't. You've got all that raft of emotions. What do you do, Rebecca?
Normally what I do is take a deep breath, or 10, or, and, you have to stop and detach from the situation. You can't help somebody who's drowning in the pool if you jump in the pool with them. You have to be able to like detach a little bit from the situation, put on your lawyer hat, and be like, okay, where are we at with the trajectory of this case? What are my ethical obligations? And lay out strategy and structure at that point and be like, if you are bound ethically to perform certain things in order to be able to protect your client, that's first priority. After that, if you're able to get through the, fill in the blank, next hearing, next client meeting, next, mediation, whatever it is, to be able to get your client to a lily pad where at that point you can reassess your relationship, that's always the first priority. I think that what I do when I find myself in that situation with the client is I try and sit down with them and figure out what the issue is. Is this something that we can move beyond? Can we create structure and scaffolding that will allow us to continue on with this relationship? Or is it at a point where we need to, assess where we're at financially, sever ties, refer out, try and get them to a place where they might be served better by someone else?
Yeah, and it's not just sometimes the difficult clients too. I mean, I remember in private practice, one time I had a client, and I didn't do the kind of work that you guys do, right? Immigration, family law, the stuff where the emotions are constantly running high and the stakes are huge, right? Families coming apart, people being deported. I mean, some significant stuff going on. But I remember distinctly one time working with a client where I realized at some point, I wonder if I'm being objective anymore because I've gotten so invested emotionally in this client that I'm really starting to wonder, am I going to do the best job for him? I'm worried that I'm going to start making decisions that are based out of that emotion as opposed to, I think Sarah mentioned it, or maybe you did, Rebecca, put your lawyer hat on. What I did is I went and found somebody to help me, right? I had the fortune to have a law partner, and I went to her and said, I need you to help me with this case because I think I'm too close to this client, right? I'm emotionally invested in what's going on. I don't want to lose my objectivity. And she did what you said, Rebecca, right? She helped me pull back, take a breath, realize where we were at, get back to being that person's lawyer, take my personal feelings out of the case, right? If you're a solo practitioner, you might not have somebody down the hall to do it, but hopefully you've got a mentor, a friend, a colleague, somebody in the business that you can reach out to that you can at least, you don't have to reveal client confidences because you got to be careful about that, but just sort of talk you off the ledge if you feel like you're at that spot.
Yes. And hopefully you can find, if you don't have that person, because I didn't like being a solo practitioner because I'm pretty extroverted, as probably everyone can tell from the way I talk on this podcast. But when you find people around, it's helpful. But also too, I had a difficult client in this. I've had multiple because I am a person who has a hard time saying no. Like boundaries, all that stuff is hard for me. And also sometimes you just have to tell a client, I can't do this for you. I can't be your lawyer anymore. And I can't ethically, it is too hard for me. I am not sleeping. I am not doing, I can't do it. And saying, look, I can't do it is also, I think, valid.
Yeah.
And that feels like a lot. And that's hard. It was very, very hard for me to get to that point. But I think that that's real. And saying, I can't represent you anymore. Ethically, I cannot do this. And I think that people think of, when we go to CLEs and stuff like that, we always think it's like, oh gosh, did you break your leg? Did you have a head injury? You can't do things. But honestly and emotionally not being able to represent a client anymore is valid, and that's part of your ethical duty. And I think being able to hold that and be true to that is important.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because if you get to the point that you've lost your objectivity, you're losing your competent ability to represent that client. Yeah, you're actually putting yourself at greater danger. You're not doing the client any favor. You're not doing yourself any favors.
Yeah.
Let me transition to this because Sarah, you and Rebecca both mentioned, and I think that's exactly right. Sometimes crisis emergencies come up in the client's life. Of course, you jump in and you do what you need to do, despite your great structure and routine. That happens sometimes. There's something burning red hot. You've got to deal with it. What if it's the other way around, though, for you as a lawyer? You've got this great structure, you've got this great routine, and then something really unexpected, a crisis develops in your life. How important is it what do lawyers do in terms of being able to make sure that they build that kind of structure in? What does that look like?
I think it goes to Sarah's point about, being able to have your squad, to the people that you really do trust, that you can rely on to come in and assist you. And it's important to build that, to have people that you can be real and honest with. It is okay. And I know that especially attorneys need to know this. It is okay to be fallible. It is okay to make mistakes, and it is okay to ask for help. There's, to know that you have those people already in your corner that you can call on is something that we all need in our practice. And, being able to build that as part of the people on your speed dial that you could call if you got hit by a bus. I mean, it's part of our ethical responsibility is to have that in place, but also to be able to have that to support you with these other types of cases as well. If it's through, different bar organizations or however we connect with each other, that bit of community is really essential, because you never know when, something happens. You should be able to have it together enough to be able to hand it off to your squad, to your tribe, your full tribe.
It's hard to find a tribe sometimes. And I think that, and I don't know if Rebecca feels this way, but it takes time to be able to say, oh my gosh, I feel nervous. I don't know if I can do it takes years to sort of, when you're already feeling like you're a good lawyer, and then you can say those things. And so I really, really, really worry about young lawyers. And so, and can they have that? Do they have someone they can talk to? I don't know. I hope that we can.
I think that sometimes, again, it's obviously Brené Brown day, but like people, right? It's one of the things that she says in some of her books is that everybody is just a person. And if somebody is a more experienced lawyer or not, you can reach out to somebody and just say, especially if you're a sole practitioner or you're in a smaller firm, if you're in a firm with other people, it should be a discussion that you have amongst lawyers in your firm. What do you do? What would happen if I got really sick? Especially in the world of COVID and pandemics, like it's not an out there question to ask. Like, what if I am felled by a crazy disease? Right. It's good to plan for that. What's the structure? What happens? But as a sole practitioner too, even being able to reach out to people and, network the best that you can to be able to have a plan.
Yeah, and you both hit on this point, which is where I sort of want to leave it. I could talk to you guys all day because I think this stuff's so important. But what I want to leave it, and you both hit on this point, which is we're going to all have challenges in practice. We're going to have the client who was difficult and emotional with us. And, Sarah talked about saying it's okay to say no to that client, right? Or to say I have to leave because emotionally it's tearing me up. And Rebecca talked about, lawyers make mistakes, and that's okay, right? It's okay to have a little self-forgiveness. Part of your self-care routine is to let yourself off the hook sometimes. Now, that's not to say you abandon your duties, you abandon your clients, you practice cavalierly without a care. But it's okay sometimes to look at yourself and be as kind to yourself as you would be to those other folks around you, right? You can be that community for those other lawyers, just as you're asking them to be the community for you.
Yeah.
Great. What else, you guys? Is that it? Are we going to do podcast 3.0 at some point, I think, because I think this is a conversation that's important to continue
I think
happening.
we're ahead, guys. I think
Yeah,
we should keep going.
Well, with that, I'm going to thank both of you again because your time is at a premium to start with, and you're very generous to give it to the legal community the way that you do, especially to talk about this, which I think is so important. And I hope that that we can continue the conversation down the road. And thank all of you for listening to Wellbeing in Action. We very much appreciate your time.
Thank you for listening. This episode was produced by the State Bar of New Mexico's Wellbeing Committee and the New Mexico Judges and Lawyers Assistance Program. All editing and sound mixing was done by Blue Sky eLearn. Intro music is by Gil Flores. The views of the presenters are that of their own and are not endorsed by the State Bar of New Mexico. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, or legal advice. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition.